Well, it's almost the Canada Day long weekend, and I know a number of viewers might enjoy a few cold beverages over the long weekend. Therefore, today on Don't Talk TV, I want to give 3 points to keep in mind when you're celebrating and after celebrating, especially with respect to driving or having care or control of a motor vehicle. Hello, my name's Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. Canada has some very strict impaired driving laws and also some strange impaired driving laws that people may not be fully aware of. I think it's very important for people to be aware of what the law is. Of course, my advice would always be simply don't drink and drive. That's the safest for everyone. It's the safest for you to stay out of trouble with the law. It's the safest to avoid anyone getting injured or dying. However, I think there's 3 important things to keep in mind. So, of course, number 1 is, as I just said, drinking and driving, don't do it. Yes, the law says you're allowed to have 80 milligrams of alcohol per centiliter of blood in your body. However, in my view, the safest course is to not push it, not try and calculate, well, what is 80 milligrams per centiliter of blood. It requires toxicologists for court to figure this out. There's a lot of factors that can go into it. How quickly your body absorbs alcohol, how quickly your body processes the alcohol out of the body. But if the fear of killing yourself or someone you love or someone else isn't enough of a reason to not drink and drive, I think RIDE programs is another reason to not do that. In Ontario, RIDE stands for Reduce Impaired Driving Everywhere. They call them check stops in Manitoba. Other provinces likely have different names. Bottom line is they'll be out in full force. These are stationary or mobile checkpoints by police where they'll stop every vehicle that comes through and question people. And keep in mind that in the old days, they had to have a reasonable suspicion that you had alcohol in your body in order to make a roadside screening device demand. Now there's no such requirement. They can just make every single person that comes into their checkpoint blow into the approved screening device. So there's really no good reason to try to push the limit or see if you can get away with something. Number 2 is don't try sleeping it off in your vehicle. This is something that I see regularly where individuals drink well past the point that they should be driving. They know enough that they shouldn't drive, but they try playing the game of, I'm going to sleep it off in my car. Now, this is more common in the winter, where people don't want to freeze to death and they want to be in a vehicle where they can turn the vehicle on to get some heat. Maybe not as common in the summer, but nevertheless, it's something I urge you not to do. Now, let's just take a quick look at what the law is, and then I can give you some further tips on that. Now, I'm looking at Her Majesty the Queen and Boudreau. It's a 2012 Supreme Court of Canada case that reaffirms what is the test for care or control of a motor vehicle. So this is different from actually operating a motor vehicle. These are for cases where an individual is simply found inside of a motor vehicle while they're drunk. So paragraph 33, they lay out the essential elements of care or control. So that's 1, an intentional course of conduct associated with a motor vehicle, so opening the door and getting in, for example. 2, by a person whose ability to drive is impaired or whose alcohol level exceeds the legal limit. And 3, in circumstances that create a realistic risk of danger to persons or property. So that third one is the important one. Some people think that, well, as long as I don't have the keys in the ignition, I'm good to go. Not exactly, because there could still be circumstances where even though the keys aren't in the ignition, there could still be that realistic risk of danger. And the Supreme Court went on to say that the risk of danger must be realistic and not theoretically possible. However, it doesn't need to be probable or even serious or substantial. It just needs to be realistic. And then at paragraph 41, they say a realistic risk that the vehicle will be set in motion obviously constitutes a realistic risk of danger. Accordingly, an intention to set the vehicle in motion suffices in itself to create the risk of danger. On the other hand, an accused who satisfies the court that he or she had no intention to set the vehicle in motion will not necessarily escape conviction. an inebriated individual who is found behind the wheel and has a present ability to set the vehicle in motion without intending at that moment to do so may nevertheless present a realistic risk of danger. So a couple of things there. One, as alluded to in that last passage, there is a presumption. If you're in the driver's seat of the vehicle, there's an automatic presumption that you're there for the purpose of putting it in motion. So that requires you to get on the stand to rebut that. The second part of that, as we can see, is even if you don't have the intention of putting in motion, being drunk, you could change your mind. Courts can find all kinds of ways to find that there's a realistic chance of you causing a danger by being in your vehicle drunk. So my advice is don't do it. Thirdly, I think people should be aware that it's now a crime in Canada to drink after you've been driving. Yes, and I mentioned this before, but I need to mention it again. It is currently in Canada a crime to stop driving and only start drinking after you're done driving. If you do it within 3 hours, that's a crime. Now, I don't think that will survive constitutional scrutiny. I think that's why I haven't seen the police actually lay a charge in circumstances where someone was only drinking after driving. But just to show you I'm not making this up, I'm looking at section 320.14 sub 1 of the Criminal Code of Canada, and here it is right here. Subject to subsection 5, if the person has, within 2 hours after ceasing to operate a conveyance, a blood alcohol concentration that is equal to or exceeds 80 milligrams of alcohol in 100 milliliters of blood. So, and everyone who commits an offense who does that. The section 5 that it's subject to is it just says no person commits an offense if they consume the alcohol after ceasing to operate the conveyance, that after ceasing the conveyance they had no reasonable expectation they'd be required to provide a sample, and their alcohol consumption is consistent with their blood alcohol concentration as determined in accordance with other sections, with their having had at the time when they were operating the conveyance an alcohol concentration less than 80 milligrams. So that's a bit of a word salad, but the bottom line is, if you drink after you've been driving, you all of a sudden have to prove that you had no reasonable expectation that you'd be required to drive again. And you have to show that your alcohol was still below 80 at the time of driving. So just something to keep in mind. And remember, I hearken back to episode 1 of Don't Talk TV. You don't have to answer the door. So if you've made it home, you're not planning on going anywhere, you want to have a few drinks to celebrate Canada Day, lock the door and don't answer it for anyone, and you won't be in any trouble. That said, this video isn't legal advice. If you need legal advice, contact a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My phone number and my website are listed below. If there's any show topics you'd like to see me cover, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. And in that regard, please have a look at our Twitter. There's a poll up there asking whether viewers would be interested in a Q&A session with me where I'm just live and viewers can ask me whatever type of questions they'd like. I'd like to know whether there's interest in that. If there is, we'll do it. If there isn't, then we won't. I'll just keep doing the type of things I've been doing. But please send us some feedback on that. If you don't want to go on Twitter, which I understand, you can send an email to the email address. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and following us on social media.